I think very helpful for agents as well as consumers to be aware of the fact that you can use an appraisal to help in your negotiation. If you're representing a buyer and you think that the property is overpriced, maybe, but a seller loves what they did to the apartment 20 years ago, you can try to give a reality check, right, by doing a third party opinion of value, the appraisal, to help show people real numbers. Maybe they'll be more realistic.
Sure, I think that would be useful at any point in the either taking the listing, pitching the listing, when something's not selling fast enough, using it to determine price reductions or price increases, although that's probably less frequent, but yeah, estimating where this thing might actually sell.
Welcome back to Real Estate Investing in New York with me, Christina Kremidas. And in this episode, we are talking about how to maximize your property's value by leveraging the appraisal. This is a critical part of the purchase and sale process in New York. I have a wonderful guest on with me today. His name is Andrew Goodman of Gotham Valuation. So stay tuned. We're covering everything here. This is Real Estate Investing in New York with Christina Kremidas, helping you achieve a future of financial success by making intelligent real estate investment decisions today. Welcome back, guys. Again, we are talking about how to maximize your property's value by leveraging the appraisal. Our guest today is Andrew Goodman of Gotham Valuation, a wealth of knowledge. Welcome, Andrew, and thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Incredible. I appreciate your time. And let's jump right into it. The audience should understand we have discussed appraisals before, but just as a little overview, the appraisal is an incredibly important part of the home selling and buying process. If there is a mortgage involved, especially, the bank is only going to give you the money to buy your property according to the appraised value. Not the value that you signed a contract agreeing to pay, but the value that a third-party appraiser says it's worth. So enter Andrew. This is where Andrew comes in and the appraisal for your property happens. And only then does the bank decide that they are willing to give you the loan amount that you asked for. And sometimes, which we'll get to, they are not willing to give you the loan amount that you ask for. So an appraisal can make or break a sale. Right, Andrew?
This is all true.
Okay, good. Anything that I left out that you want to add on to about what the appraisal is, anything they should know before we get in?
No, I think that's pretty accurate. You've described what an appraisal is as it relates to mortgage financing.
Okay, great. So if there is financing in a deal, if a buyer is buying a property and they're using a bank, obviously an appraisal is going to happen usually after the contract is signed. So we know that. But let's say that we are going to be more strategic about this property purchase or sale. When might a seller or a buyer choose, when should they choose to call an appraiser before the bank makes a decision for them?
At any point during the transaction. A seller could call us at the point where they're entertaining what to list the property for. Their realtor could call us to help them in that pricing decision by providing an opinion of value based on comparable sales. A purchaser could contact us at the point where they're considering making an offer to purchase, or once if there are multiple bids on the property. Those are both instances where a independent opinion of value could be of use.
Exactly. And I think that some agents might not realize the importance of having a resource like you on speed dial to just do a second gut check on recommendations that they've made to their clients, or bring them in for a professional appraisal when they are looking to price out a property that might not be so straightforward, right? There's a lot of nuances when it comes to certain properties, which we'll talk about, and it gets very interesting in terms of what affects property value, what doesn't affect it, how much do certain things affect property value. So yeah, I think it's very important for agents to realize this, that you are able to do appraisals even if you weren't assigned by the bank.
This is correct. it's a human element, that a human judgment that has to go into reconciling data points and adjustments and all the considerations in determining what any piece of property is worth. Artificial intelligence can't do it. It might come close if all of the comparables are identical, but ultimately in a city like New York, there are so many nuances. There are so many unique factors, so many differences block by block, floor by floor, wall by wall. So unless you've been inside 50,000 homes or done this for 30 years, like it's hard to get that right.
100% true. I feel like every block of the city is its own community. It's kind of like its own little neighborhood of its own, because you're absolutely right. I mean, even if you look at Chelsea, I mean, there's specific block in Chelsea where if you go north of that, you're looking at a very different property value than if you're south. Right? So
very true. Even on the same block, let's walk down Fifth Avenue and go building by building, and I can tell you where two buildings could be right next to each other and they're very different.
exactly.
One might have only 9-room apartments and one might have only 4-room apartments, or one might be a million factors, different architect, different style, different financial structure. So unless you know the nuances of each building on the same block, it's hard to get it right.
Absolutely. And another reason why this is so important is that not every appraiser gets it right. That's true, right?
There's a human element to it. So we all have access to the same information. We can all look on StreetEasy or Acris and find out what something sold for. But the question is, what do you do with that piece of information? And that's going to be determined by your expertise and your point of view. So no two appraisers are going to have the same perspective in looking at and analyzing the data.
So I've had apartments that I've sold where our appraisal came in wildly, in my opinion, off, let's say low. And I'm kind of convinced that the appraiser just didn't like the property and took a little extra off for that. Do you feel like personal opinion ever gets into an appraisal's value determination?
It really shouldn't. I mean, personal judgment does influence the conclusion of value, but not personal opinion, not bias. I mean, bias should not enter the equation, no.
Right. Like, what if someone's walls are painted like this color, for example, right? We have a bold color in this room, and these walls are dark blue, and someone just hates this look, right? Like, is there a certain value that would be deducted because of a custom update like this?
Well, it wouldn't be based on hatred. It would be based on market reaction. So I could look at this blue wall and say, it's the worst color I've ever seen, but that doesn't mean I'm adjusting because I don't like the color blue. What I'm looking at is, what does the typical buyer perceive when they see this color blue? If it is a completely inappropriate choice, then what is it going to cost to redo it? Or is there any market reaction? Maybe the cost of repainting this blue wall white is nominal and no one cares. That's what I'm judging, not my own personal preference.
Do trends come into play at all? Like, do you ever find yourself noting something about a property that might be a bit unique, but it's what people want right now, so maybe it won't be a deduction, but if it's something that is like not in style, for example, it would be?
Yes, absolutely, especially as things speed up, as we've moved on in years. Like, it seems that new development is happening faster and faster, and whereas 20 years ago, a newly built building may stay relevant for a period of years, it seems like in 2025, newly built buildings are staying relevant shorter because there's something newer and shinier popping up right around the corner, like right away. So trends definitely are relevant in that regard. So there are points in time where you can look at, okay, every building that was built between 1992 and 1996 has these certain styles and these certain features to it that may be discounted today because they're no longer current. And what they're building last year may be no longer the current trend 3 years from now.
It's a very interesting point, and I think very helpful for agents as well as consumers to be aware of the fact that you can use an appraisal to help in your negotiation, You can, if you're representing a buyer and you think that the property is overpriced, maybe, but a seller loves what they did to the apartment 20 years ago, you can try to give a reality check, right, by doing a third party opinion of value, the appraisal, to help show people real numbers. Maybe they'll be more realistic.
Definitely.
And if you're working with a seller, if you're an agent and you're working with a seller that, again, like maybe they have an estimation of what the property is worth, you can, of course, use the appraisal in advance strategically to come down to earth a little bit, right?
Sure, I think that would be useful at any point in the either taking the listing, pitching the listing, when something's not selling fast enough, using it to determine price reductions or price increases. Well, that's probably less frequent, but yeah, estimating where this thing might actually sell.
Yeah, and I've also used appraisals as a seller's agent to justify our price too. That also is helpful for a buyer to see a real third-party source, not just a agent's opinion, right, on the value of the property.
Sure. I've had agents express interest in having an appraisal because they're concerned as far as where it might appraise when they have an offer for the bank appraisal. And if we have a deal that's over what can be substantiated in the bank appraisal, what's the point?
Exactly. So what can you do if an appraisal comes in under? Well, an appraisal coming in high is not really a deal problem unless your seller decides that they now want more money for the property. But usually you're in contract already and you can't really fix that.
Or I will say that has sometimes presents an issue with co-ops where the board is sensitive to the notion that something is selling for far less than what it's worth. So I'm actually sensitive to that with co-ops, to not appraise the property for substantially more than what it's selling for if I don't have to.
And that's a good point because you can have a rejected sale from the co-op board.
You can.
And if it comes in under, we all know that the deal is significantly in jeopardy because this buyer no longer will be able to obtain funding unless they come up with the balance of the contract price that they agreed to minus the appraised value, right? They have to come up with the balance,
the difference,
if they want to buy the property. So that's one option. If the appraisal comes in low, we can all keep moving forward and the buyer will have to kick in the difference in cash up front, which is not always easy for most buyers. So what are the other things that we can do if an appraisal comes in low?
Well, number one, you can switch banks. You can simply call up the next bank down the line and ask them to give you financing and start the process all over again. That actually might be the best bet. The process, which is formerly known as value reconsideration, is how it's officially termed, is what you can do if you disagree with the appraisal result. It is exceedingly difficult and problematic to really have that be effective. I've seldom found that to be effective.
Yeah. We've had to request reevaluations a couple of times, and like you said, it's really tough to get them back any higher.
Have you ever found that they worked?
We've had one that came in slightly higher, from what I recall, slightly higher, but not where we needed to be still. So it didn't get our deal done. No.
Yeah, to get an appraiser to change their value conclusion is an uphill battle. It's relatively impossible unless you can really point out something fraudulent or inappropriate. But they're better armed to defend their conclusion than you are to counter their opinion.
It is. It's very interesting. And if you switch banks, that means a new appraiser is going to be sent out, completely different person than the first.
Unless you get unlucky and they hire the same appraiser twice.
That would be so. I've had bad appraisals happen, and I think I would just immediately start crying if I saw the same person show up the second time.
There's certainly been times where I've gotten the same appraisal by two different banks within 2 weeks or 3 weeks, or even within 2 days. I'm like, oh, this is great, going twice.
Whoa, that's rough.
It's good for me.
Right? That is so funny. So the second bank might, right? If you think that there was an issue, like something that was wrong with the original appraisal, a good option could be to work with another bank, send out another appraisal, take another whirl at it, could get your deal done. Maybe that appraisal will come in correctly if the original one had a mistake, or the second appraisal might also come in low, and now you've kind of double confirmed that this property is under appreciating, and now you might have a bigger deal problem on your hands because now the buyer's definitely upset.
Unless there is a reason why it is appraising low and you can convince the buyer why that is rationally and have some accounting for you're buying this property and an appraisal is not able to fully capture the market value at this moment for X, Y, and Z reason.
Yes.
That can be the case.
Which brings me to the next question that I have that I'm very interested in hearing what you do for this. And we're in the midst of this now. We've been in the midst of this for a while, I want to say. But market fluctuations have been significant. In the past 5 years, we've seen markets go way up and then way down pretty quickly. And appraisals usually have a little bit of a lag time before they catch up to current market values.
This is true. We are fundamentally looking, it's a opinion that's based on historic data, so it's always going to be backward facing. We're not basing it on future data points that don't exist yet.
Especially in Manhattan, where the closing process can take 6 months.
It can in some cases.
Yeah.
Sometimes what we should really be looking at and ideally looking at is the contract price of a deal, not the closing date of a deal, because the closing is just a predetermined or sometimes delayed occurrence.
Right.
Not when the meeting of the minds occurred.
And that makes a lot of sense. I do have appraisers that will call me when they see that a listing of mine is closed in contract, because they're interested in knowing what the price is before it closes, right? It's not publicly reflected yet. And agents are willing to share that information with you. They're hesitant to share it with other agents, but
not always, especially if it's, we get hesitation quite a bit, especially if it's a co-op more than anything else. I think there's some sense of it being proprietary and maybe not letting that information out. But with all property types, we usually have to leverage either a personal relationship, or a lot of times it can't be in writing, so I'll have to call and sort of sensitively flesh out what that contract price is.
Yeah. Would you say that as an appraiser, at least personally with how you work on your business, do you see yourself as a partner in the deal, essentially helping a deal close, or do you see yourself as someone that's trying to catch an incorrect property value, for example? Do you feel like your goal is to make that deal work out and ultimately attempt to meet the contract price?
Yeah, so that's actually a really interesting question, and I think that really depends on your point of view and sort of how you're brought up in the industry. I think anyone who's successful at doing this has the first approach, which is to not cause problems unless there's a reason, a glaring reason why a contract price can't be supported. The focus is on, okay, someone's paying this price for a reason. What do we have to do? How can I substantiate this? Sometimes it's not possible, but if you're taking the approach to, I say work collaboratively, we are independent, but it's good business to appraise things well, or to not be the sticking point in a deal. It's beneficial for us in our relationships with the bank. It's beneficial for our relationships with the brokerage community. It's just no one wants the added headache. We want to wake up, write an appraisal, do another appraisal, not do one and then spend the rest of the day fighting.
Right, exactly. And I think that agents don't always have a comfort level with the appraiser. So I feel like sometimes sometimes they can even be like scared of the appraiser. I feel you kind of
most
show
are.
Up, right?
Yes.
You show up and you're like, hello, sir, ma'am, like welcome in. And you want to share whatever knowledge you have about the property with the appraiser, but they're very nervous about exactly how to communicate with the appraiser, and should I provide comparables, or are they going to get offended because they already know the comparables, and what information is beneficial to you to receive from an agent when you are coming in and doing an appraisal, and how should they be communicating with you?
I always say any way they want. So the usually question will you take the comparables? Can I provide you comparables? Feel free if you want to. I'm never going to say no. They're mostly the same information we already have. So in some cases, it's redundant. I would say information that if you are just printing out the Street Easy report, I could do that too. But if you have some insight on any of the information, that's useful. If you have specific contract prices that haven't been recorded yet, those are really useful. If you know of specific circumstances that impact any of the comparables that are relevant, like in the same building, that's useful to know. Like this one had an amazing kitchen, this one had someone die in it, this one faces the river, this one, whatever it might be.
Do you appreciate receiving from the agent like a list of updates that have been made to that apartment, specific like itemized lists?
Really depends on how interesting or how relevant the updates are. If it's really been updated to a dramatic effect and that's the reason that someone's spending the amount they're spending because of all the custom improvements, yeah, that's helpful. Sometimes I find myself going back to Street Easy just to copy down, if the broker has remarked on all of the different updates that I might miss in the 30 seconds I'm in the home, yeah, then that's useful. But if it's, 15-year-old items, I don't need to see a whole breakdown of every feature that was added.
Let's get into that juicy stuff. Talk to us about renovations. Some sellers go all out with a very high-end renovation, designer everything, very expensive fixtures. And is there a law of diminishing returns on renovations? At what point would you tell a seller, if you were recommending what they do to increase their property value but not spend more than they'll ever get back, what would that guide? Do you have an idea of where is that law of diminishing returns coming into play when it comes to renovation level?
It's different in every case. I think that in today's world, construction costs are so high, and the delta, if you will, the difference between an unrenovated property and renovated properties is quite large, that there's going to be a point where performing a renovation should, in theory, have a positive economic return. There is a point at which that diminishes. So it's hard for me to tell you exactly where that is, but once you're adding finishes that are above market standard, if you are building to a level of finish that's beyond what you would see in a brand new condo, that's probably, any dollar beyond that is probably dollars that you're not going to get back.
That's very good advice.
Like, don't build something that is, if you want to build it, go ahead, but don't expect to see a return on your investment if you're building something that is nicer than every other comp that you'll ever see.
Right. I saw a listing, not so recently, but I saw a listing within the past year, I want to say. And the designer name is escaping me right now. I wish it was in my mind. But the entire dining room was wall to wall with this absolutely beautiful hand-painted designer wallpaper. It's very expensive paper. And they were mentioning that as, one of the many luxury updates that were done in this home. And I wonder, would you get your money back for something like that?
You might, but it would have to be a specialized case. I've seen instances where if a seller wants to hold to their price and wait, then sure, I guess you'll find the person who appreciates it and wants that luxury finish as is, but that's often a waiting game. Who's got more patience?
Right. And an appraiser might not want to give 20, 30, 50 grand to a unit for wallpaper value.
That's something that's easier to give value to after there's already a contract in place. If you are at the point where someone has offered, if you have a deal in place and it reflects pricing for whatever that those finishes might be, then we can go back and sort of say, okay, how can we substantiate this designer finish? But in a vacuum, if we're just independently estimating for a refinance or a private valuation, it can be tricky. Yeah, right. We might not be able to give it specified value above the same generic high level of,
Right.
wallpaper or paint or range or whatever it might be.
Yeah. And this is a question that I thought of while we were chatting. It's not something that we had previously talked about when we prepped. So I hope that you do
Let's see.
have
Bring
something
it on.
for it. But I know that if a property is being sold furnished, you are not allocating any value,
Zero value.
zero value to the furnishings in the unit, the furniture specifically.
That is correct, because that
It
is
can-
personal property.
Personal property. It can be extremely expensive stuff, but there will be no value associated with it. So you have some situations where a property price is inclusive of furnishings, but we cannot associate value to that in an appraisal, for
That's
example.
right.
So it makes it very difficult to finance those types of pieces that it makes it very hard for that to be included in your sale.
Yes, you'd probably have to be prepared for the property to be worth less than your contract price in that case, and understand that you'll have to fund the difference somehow.
Fund the difference somehow, right? And that's something that
Take out a smaller loan to value.
Yes, and they'll be prepared to, they'll be
Yep.
prepared to, because a mortgage is not on your dining room table. A mortgage
Correct.
is only on the real estate. Now, what do you consider the real estate? So would that wallpaper be the real estate? Would the fixtures that are in the walls, the crystal chandelier, be the real estate?
Yes,
Would
it
that
is.
be included?
Anything that's attached to the property that's not
Okay.
being excluded, that's not coming out in the contract.
Okay, so if you have beautiful light fixtures that are expensive, that's not a
Sure.
waste. You should get money back for it.
That is something that we would consider in the opinion of value, what the light fixtures are, what the wallpaper is, what the shelving is, what have you, yes.
Okay. Let's talk about outdoor space and how it affects property value.
Everyone's favorite topic.
It's a tricky one.
It is. Every outdoor space is different. No two are created equal. Mm-hmm. So there are some guidelines that get thrown about. 50% as a starting point. And it's a starting point, but ultimately there are a lot of factors that we take into account when we're valuing outdoor space.
Right. And you said the starting point is 50% of the value of the internal space, right? So you would take the price per square foot that we're going off of for the internal space and dividing it by 2.
Yes, that could be where you start the conversation of thinking about what is my outdoor space worth. Mm-hmm. I would say that more often than not, it's not worth 50% of the value of the interior space on a per square foot basis.
Right.
It's just people look for easy ways to figure things out, or I need to know exactly what XYZ formula I can throw at something. So they throw that at outdoor space. It's not usually right.
Right. Well, definitely, I would assume law of diminishing returns on that is, I don't know if I'm using the right term actually, but I would assume that you're going to get a lot more value per square foot for a modest sized balcony to be able to say you have this external space. You can get some fresh air, you can step outside, you can get some sun, versus an apartment that has a massive amount of outdoor space that not everybody needs, right?
This is true. There's a certain threshold where if an outdoor space is too small or has limited utility, it has very nominal or minimal value. There's a threshold where you look at, okay, what activity are you going to do on the outdoor space? Can I put a chair? Can I put a chair and a table? Can I sit and have coffee on it? Can I entertain 10 people on it? Can I throw a party for 200 on it? Can my kids play soccer on it? There's a certain point at which that becomes too much outdoor space. I've always thought about it in terms of once the amount of outdoor space exceeds the total area of the interior apartment is where there's sort of limited incremental value. If you have 1,000 square foot apartment, I probably would give very little, if any, value to outdoor space beyond 1,000 square feet, as an example.
Very good rule of thumb.
But there are many other important factors, like where is the outdoor space accessible from? 1,000 square feet that's located 2 floors above the living room in a loft that you have to access by a spiral staircase is a lot less valuable than 1,000 square feet where you open up your French doors and you're walking right out to it.
Yes.
Also very different, does my outdoor space have a view? Does my outdoor space have utilities? Is it lighted? Does it have watering? Does it have a gazebo? Does it have electricity? Does it have any of these factors? Is it shaded? Does it have an awning? Is it shaded from the sun? Is it on the 80th floor and it's too windy?
The very good information. I have clients that I spoke with recently who we helped them purchase an apartment a couple of years ago, and they came back to us asking if it would be a good idea for them to furnish their roof. They currently have roof rights. It's about the size of their apartment internally, and they can access it by going up a flight of stairs in their building, but it currently is not usable. It's currently not furnished in any way. It's just like a tar roof or whatever it's made out of. Yeah. And they asked if they should deck it out and make it some usable space.
Sure.
What do you think on that?
Finished outdoor space is always a lot more valuable than unfinished outdoor space. So within reason, putting decking and hardscaping and any other utilities that you can throw up there would probably be a useful investment.
And just be cognizant of how much you're investing to get the work done.
Right, and be cognizant of what market segment are you in? Is this a $1 million property, a $10 million property, a $500,000 property, and have the improvements be appropriate for what the resale value might be, if that's your consideration, if you care about resale value.
Very good point. What about views? I think that views are probably one of the most important elements to a New York City apartment.
100%.
Yeah.
It's the one thing that you can't change. You can never change the amount of light, and you can never change the view. I mean, you can have your view destroyed if someone builds something taller in front of you. But other than that, if your apartment is dark, it's always going to be dark. If your apartment faces Central Park, it may always face Central Park.
Right, exactly. So is there a general rule of thumb that you would associate value to? For example, let's say the 9th floor of a particular line in a building faces a brick wall, but the 10th floor of the same line, same size apartment in the same building, so we're talking same amenities, same everything else, clears that building next door, and you have an open view. What would you be able to give an estimated ballpark differential in value between those two units?
Gut feeling is that's probably like a 5 or 10% difference.
Okay.
There's a solid number you can hang your hat on.
Right. That's not bad. I mean, and especially for a pricey property, that's a big difference.
It is a big difference. Facing clearing buildings versus not clearing buildings, you can see this in all sorts of neighborhoods. Go to Williamsburg, where you have a lot of 2- and 3-story buildings, low-rise buildings, and once you get above the tree line, you don't have to be on 20, you can be on 4, and it's a whole different situation in terms of the amount of light and what you look at, and the pricing reflects that.
Right, and like you said, what are you looking at? Like a Central Park view, for example.
Yeah,
is so valuable.
As valuable as it gets. I mean, that could be over a quarter of an apartment's value is facing something as iconic as the biggest amenity in New York City.
Absolutely, that's definitely what I see too. I mean, all things considered, for similar properties on Central Park, I see multi-million-dollar price changes for units that face the park versus units that don't.
You almost can't compare them, and we go out of our way to avoid comparing a direct park view apartment with something that does not have the same view, because you're forced to extrapolate or adjust at such an extreme amount.
You're right. I sold an apartment recently in Trump Tower, and some of the units face the park and some of the units have a skyline view, which is not Central Park obviously facing. And we did have a difficult time, with our seller explaining that this unit that I was selling was not facing the park. So there was a lot of conversation about price per square foot in the building and why we were obviously receiving offers that were below that. And when I ran my comps for my clients, I was only using units that faced the city, not the park. But
yeah,
it makes a big difference.
Especially at Trump Tower, I can tell you from personal experience that is huge. You almost can't compare the lines that are north facing on that corner versus the ones that face the 3 other directions.
You know your buildings.
Every building.
And that view from that particular building, when you have the right angle, is really cool. You get the Plaza Hotel, you get the park.
It's pretty special.
It's really special, really cool. I know I feel like you probably get a lot of the same comments that my clients give me, where it's cool. You're in and out of the most beautiful buildings all day long.
We're in and out of the most beautiful buildings, in and out of the most average buildings, in and out of the most less than beautiful buildings, in and out of every building.
True. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Very true. So let's talk more property pricing differentials, because I feel like it's incredibly important for people, and it's very interesting for me and for our listeners.
Great.
What about duplex apartments? I'm currently selling one. Duplex apartments that have a staircase separating maybe living space from bedrooms, certain things like this. How do you factor in a duplex layout? Is it a pro? Is it a con?
Same answer. It's different in every case. There are some times when duplexes create an ideal separation of space that people are after. Buildings are designed 100 years ago with grand duplex residences, and sometimes that can result in double height ceilings or added ceiling height. Those are nice. I don't think intrinsically having two levels makes something any more valuable than having one level. I've seen cases where people prefer to have all the living space on one level to avoid the staircase situation. Mm-hmm. So there isn't a one rule that applies to all property types. I think anytime you get to more than two levels in, let's say, something that's not a proper full house, it can become problematic. You see this in like sometimes cut up apartments or smaller apartments where like you have the bedroom on one floor and the living room on another floor and the bathroom on a third floor and there's a mezzanine floor. Those feel like they can be tricky.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Where that might be less valuable than having everything be on one level with uniform ceiling height. I think ceiling height's a big factor to consider in this whole duplex conversation. Mm-hmm. Consistency, and obviously for the most part, the higher the ceilings, the better.
Yeah. So I've shown properties where on your topic of ceiling height, there are many buildings in New York where on one floor, the ceiling heights are higher. The builder was just able to do it this way. So you'll go and you'll view a building. Maybe it's a new development where you're viewing a few different options in the building, and you walk into a particular unit and you're told this floor is the only floor where the ceilings are this high. Is that a real benefit in terms of property value, and how much should someone really be paying more for that?
Yeah, it depends upon where it is. You can see this in a lot of cases. Interestingly, probably still in buildings today, like the penthouse floors generally had an extra foot of ceiling height, and it wasn't always just the ceiling height. I think the factor to think about in that is how did it impact the window bays? Like if you looked at the penthouse units, they had that extra foot of window height in addition to the ceiling height. That was the game changer. So there's definitely a pricing premium for that, which again, I don't want to throw out a generic figure of like 5%, but it could be like hundreds of thousands of dollars depending on what that was, because those are generally larger apartments. You generally don't find a new development with like a studio line and then, okay, we're adding an extra foot of window and ceiling height. It's usually 2, 3, 4 bedroom unit where the amount adds up. You can interestingly see this in the older neighborhoods downtown, for example, where, take Soho, where the second floor is going to have a 14-foot ceiling, and by the time you get up to 5, it's like down to 10 feet, and the pricing differential, again, could be really significant.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
$500,000 or some, depending upon how dramatic it is. Does it have 12-foot like Palladian windows? Does it have, again, not ceiling height, but architectural features to support it?
Yeah. And you're right. It's all so nuanced. This
is why you need a human being to figure it out.
Yep.
Go plug that into AI and see what you get.
You can't do it. You can't. I feel like you do. You're in an industry where you're not going anywhere. People are not going anywhere.
Hope not.
In your
you
industry.
Never know. They'll find a way.
Right? But I see what you're saying, though. It's all so nuanced. There are so many details. So what about someone has a let's say 1,000 or 1,500 square foot apartment, and they want to know if they would increase their property value at all by adding a bedroom or adding a bathroom. What's your recommendation on that?
Adding bedrooms and bathrooms are tricky because, I mean, certainly there has to be plumbing and infrastructure in place. You can't just add a bathroom because you want to add a bathroom. And bedrooms require dimensions and windows and natural light, etc., to be useful, and they have to work within the flow of an apartment. So my sense is that most properties are optimized for the amount of bedrooms and bathrooms, unless it's like a weird conversion where someone left it white box or didn't do that. So in most cases, I think it would be challenging to add more bedrooms or bathrooms in a way that isn't already there, unless it's like a junior floor and you're converting the open dining area to a walled off bedroom. That would be a case where I see the second room as adding a lot of value.
Yes, I love those layout apartments where you have a dining alcove that you could eventually, maybe later down the line, convert to a bedroom.
There definitely is a difference in pricing once the dining room is already converted.
Interesting, because it lends itself well to that feeling like a real room, right?
Yes, and anyone can do it, but this goes to the renovation question. Someone might pay more to have it already be done.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the properties that have that dining alcove area in that specific layout where it can be converted off, right? That layout, even if it's not converted yet, I see trades for more because it has that option versus a dining alcove in an area of the apartment that doesn't have a window, for example.
100%. And there's so many nuances. Again, it's not just having the alcove in the right place. What's the width of the alcove? What are the window bays for which you're installing your wall? How does that line up? So again, this goes to why there's a human element, because the difference between a 6-foot wide dining alcove and a 10-foot wide dining alcove are dramatic. But how would you otherwise know that unless you're actually reading the floor plan?
Right. Yes. And yeah, it's the difference between that bedroom being able to be considered legally a bedroom too, right?
Or just being useful enough for your toddler or your nanny or whoever, your home office, to be functional.
Very good point.
Speaking of trends, that's the new one, is the non-windowed home office. I've seen that being constructed quite a bit and being recognized as an amenity that adds value. So just as much as walling off the alcove, if there's a space where you can build a proper workstation, since people may not be working in their office 5 days a week so much anymore.
Right.
Smart. I've seen people do that and it be well recognized.
Interesting. Yeah, definitely demand for a private home working space now more than ever. That makes sense. What about building amenities? Is there a range where, I guess when you're doing an appraisal, you're comparing units within the building, so you're not really needing to compare it to units that don't have amenities if your unit has amenities. But would you say there's a good amount of added value, all other things equal, to a building that has amenities versus one that doesn't?
I think location is a big factor in that, and you see that with buildings that are remote or, you can't build a high-end building anywhere without amenities today. But if you look at specific instances of properties that are destinations, they have every amenity known to man, and it's probably because it's 20 minutes to walk to the subway, and maybe they need to entice people to come. And also there's that aspect, and then I think buyers are actually appreciating it for the community perspective that it adds. I've interviewed people when I'm doing refinances about all the amenities in their building, and they say, God, I love it so much just because I can't meet this many people in any other way other than hanging out in the 10,000 square foot or 20,000 square foot amenity space.
Such a good point. Yes, said like a true expert, because you're absolutely correct. You see these properties that are super far west or super far east in Hudson Yards or Hell's Kitchen or Turtle Bay that are very amenity rich, but they are a 15-minute walk to the nearest transportation. And you may find a more centrally located apartment go for more, higher price per square foot with less amenities.
You might, yeah. So that
You definitely will.
you definitely will.
Yeah. What about subway proximity? Is that adding value for appraisal?
I think it does in certain cases. Like obviously the Second Avenue subway was a game changer for the Upper East Side, and you see properties that, First Avenue used to be like, oh my God, it's First Avenue, but now you're only one block to the train. And there are other neighborhoods like, do I care that I live on top of the NR stop on Prince Street? Probably not. So case by case, certain neighborhoods demand it more for travel patterns. For are they families using it? Are the West Chelsea, not near a subway at all, doesn't really impact the pricing for any of those Starchitect buildings along the High Line.
Right.
Less demand or care about it than the Upper East Side.
Something that I know agents are dying for me to ask you.
Hit me with it.
What about monthlies? If a building has higher maintenance, lower maintenance going into your monthly expenses for the apartment, how is it affecting?
Yeah,
value.
That's a big one. No one wants to pay more when they don't have to. So we definitely account for a difference in monthly carrying charge, all else being equal. I know there are multiple different ways that I've seen different appraisers or agents or anyone account for it. My approach, which may be unique to me, is to look at monthlies on a per square foot basis, not just in a vacuum. An apartment that's 1,500 square feet should have a higher monthly charge, all else being equal, than an apartment that's 1,200 square feet. So after accounting for that, then I might take the difference and project out, okay, how many months is a typical prospective buyer going to factor that, what's their holding period for factoring that couple $100 a month difference. And that's how I personally figure out what adjustment I want to make.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Because when we calculate value for our clients, oftentimes we are looking at monthly obligation. So there's a balance between, of course, because if the monthlies are higher, if the maintenance and the property taxes are higher, the purchase price will end up being lower, like you just said, and vice versa. So I often do show my clients like a grid of sorts of their favorite properties and how their monthly payment is looking for each of them at the end of the day. And it sounds like something that you're also strongly taking into consideration.
I can even tell in advance if you see a listing or a sale of something and the price was, let's say, objectively lower than you'd expect it to be. The first thing that pops up, it's probably got outrageous monthlies. And sure, like maybe it's a land lease building, or maybe it's something that, too many shares were allocated to it, but probably more than any other factor, that's one that just can kill, a sale price. If you're paying, I don't know, $8,000 a month for a 1,500 square foot unit, maybe an extreme example.
Right. No, it's exactly true. And you mentioned land lease. How do you look at land lease buildings?
Very carefully. There's no real way to analyze the terms of a land lease, and it's haphazard. We basically try our best to comp it to other land lease buildings and stick within the same building if we can, and not sort of leave the building for comps. But rarely will we comp a land lease building to a non-land lease building, and if so, we're just taking a stab at what that difference is and pulling an adjustment out of somewhere.
Interesting. So are you not really looking at the lease itself?
Correct.
So you're not really
looking at the
worried
lease
about
itself.
when it expires or what level of risk is involved.
That's right.
Sooner versus later. Interesting. And what about a neighborhood like Battery Park City, where every building is a land lease? I guess that's easy for you because you're comping it against others of the same.
It can be very easy and it can be impossible. Either, yes, every condo in Battery Park City is subject to a land lease, which means that never taking a comp outside of Battery Park for Battery Park, just because legally we can't, the bank won't permit it. But it's a problem if you have a really unique unit in Battery Park. There could be nothing to comp it to.
Right.
Because there's only so many properties in Battery Park. So your 3,000 square foot penthouse that faces the Statue of Liberty might not have any comps we can use in a bank appraisal.
And what happens then?
I don't know. Good question. We either figure it out somehow or do the best we can, or the thing
Right.
comes out too short or too high or some other permutation that's less than ideal.
Right.
Hopefully the parties can forecast this in advance, and maybe it's an all cash deal, or maybe, I don't know, to figure it out. But I
Interesting.
don't know if I've seen that like personally, and I don't know if there's been a deal in Battery Park that we've not been able to figure out.
Right. I mean, I feel like there's not the hugest spread in terms of, you know, you don't have like a Central Park Tower penthouse level unit in Battery Park City, really. That would be such an outlier.
There are a couple of them, like some of the nicer buildings have really
Like beautiful, yeah.
beautiful, huge apartments. But yeah, for them, I would say 98% of the inventory falls in a standard range.
More straightforward, yeah.
Yeah.
That Battery Park City topic is an interesting one for sure, because people have a lot of questions about that and the land lease. But
Yeah, it's unusual.
it is.
But it's generally not a problem for appraisals.
Yeah. What about assessments? If a building has a short-term assessment in place and this year the person that's buying might be paying an extra $12,000 over the course of a year on top of their monthlies, and it makes the sale maybe a bit harder. Are
Yeah.
you factoring that in when
Not
you
really.
appraise?
It's not something we account for, anything short term. It's beyond our capacity to evaluate, and it's like way down at the bottom of the list. There are so many other variables that are more important for us to consider.
Gotcha. Okay. And what about laundry in unit versus not in unit?
I think you're getting to the point now where in many cases it's expected, and there are probably more apartments with laundry in them today than there were 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So yeah, it's something we look at and something we try to account for as best possible.
Is there a ballpark that you associate if you're comparing comps and you're going to make a adjustment for laundry or no laundry?
Honestly, it's one of those factors where I'll probably gloss over if I can and figure out somewhere else, figure out some other way of making up for the difference in what in that laundry versus no
Interesting.
laundry. Other than it can be difficult to tell when something does or doesn't have laundry, and gauging the exact market reaction. Again, this gets to the point where there are so many other factors. I could
Right.
adjust for a floor level difference or a square footage difference or a view difference or some other renovated versus unrenovated kitchen. And at that point, if I add on 10, 20, 30, $40,000 for laundry, it's a
Yeah.
rounding error.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are so many prestigious buildings in Manhattan that just simply can't accommodate laundry in every unit, and they go for high prices, but no one has laundry in their unit. They have it in the building.
Yeah, that does exist.
So you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
It's not the top factor on my list of things to consider.
No. And I guess it's not a massive expense for someone to put laundry in their unit.
It has to be allowed. It has to be space. It has to be permissible by the building.
Right. Do you ever look at building policies when you're appraising?
That's interesting. That I think is relevant. I haven't seen too many brand new buildings, but like a decade or so ago, you had a spate of new development co-ops. So you had buildings, because the developer didn't own the land, they would build something new, and it technically wouldn't be a condo, it would be a co-op, but with condo rules. So that goes to your building policy question. We'd be comparing it to other co-ops that were not brand new, but having to factor in the ownership rights are the same. It's a co-op versus a co-op, but one has condo rules versus co-op rules. So yes, like unlimited subletting and basically functioning like a condo. So we would have to account for that.
Such a good point that I wasn't even thinking of when I asked you that question. But yeah, the condops, which is the co-op with condo
Yes.
rules, is what we call them. Yeah, they do tend to trade, you're getting a better price than you would if you were buying a straight up condo, but they can be a premium versus the same equivalent straight co-op because you do have the flexibility.
Yes, and it's a nuanced thing that most people are not aware of.
We talk about new development sales. They can sometimes
Sure.
be tricky because when you are negotiating on sponsor sales, what we have at our disposal in terms of data to use for sales are what has been sold in terms of purchase price, but there is no public record of concessions that the sponsor gave that buyer to incentivize them to close, and those can be significant.
Very significant. It could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we have no way of knowing either. So we're looking at a closed sale and it's $3 million, but we don't know if the buyer received $250,000 back in incentives or concessions.
Very interesting. So they're appraising, let's say, 2 units closed.
Appraising at face value rather than
back end what the person right really ended up paying. Right. And that makes sense because when I negotiate on sponsor sales, I never really expect that I'm going to throw off my appraisal.
You won't.
No. And we sometimes try to use credits. Certain times when someone is getting financing, you can use credits to your advantage if cash on hand is something that's important to a buyer. But you do have to be cognizant of how far can we push this price, getting credits back in return before we end up with a short appraisal.
Right. I don't think you're going to be able to push it above where the other closed sales in the building have been.
Right.
We do find that limitation with new developments where there's always one that is the highest price, or something always has to be the lowest price and something always has to be the highest price. And sometimes being the highest price one can be tricky.
Yeah, very interesting.
It's not a great place to be for getting an appraisal done.
Right. What about if you have a building that's a due diligence nightmare, like the financials are a mess, or the building has litigation going on, or the board is a political nightmare, and there's, meeting minutes show that it's a giant mess, something that an attorney would have an issue with. Do you have an issue with any of these things?
It's well beyond the scope in a bank appraisal to evaluate. Like there simply isn't the resource for us to cobble together all that information and process it. So unless there is some glaring recognition of litigation or someone's pointing out why price is impacted by it, it's usually not something we're going to consider, other than if, let's say, there's a legal issue or some known factor that someone wants us to consider in a private valuation, like I can't do XYZ with my apartment, or it's been, I've got a leak for 3 years that the building won't allow me to fix or won't fix properly. How is this diminishing my market value sort of situation?
Okay, so it's kind of something that has to be brought up to you.
Otherwise, how would we know?
Yeah, because you're not going through the same process that the attorney is going through.
Not an attorney.
Another very important question. A lot of people calculate property values using price per square foot.
Yes.
That is the most common way of calculating value in condos specifically.
It is.
What are your thoughts about using that as a metric for valuing?
It's a fine starting place. It's not the be all end all. It's tiresome to hear how often it's relied upon if it's not used correctly. Price per square foot is great if all your comps are identical or highly similar to what it is that you're trying to value. But as soon as you start looking at comps that have different features, what value is the price per square foot? What use is it? If I am a 2-bedroom on the 30th floor, taking an average price per square foot of the building that includes the 5th floor unit and the 55th floor unit and things that are 1 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms, and okay, so it's an average, but if I'm not the average apartment, that's a meaningless calculation.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do. Everyone wants to know what the building average is, and we provide it. When I talk to my clients, I provide it.
Great. That's useful if you're the average unit.
Exactly. Then, of course, you need to provide the explanation for why the unit that we're looking at specifically, why your target unit is above or below average. And then there's still more work to be done. There's no short answer, right?
If the building is so homogeneous that everything is identical, great. Use price per square foot as a metric and put all of your eggs in that basket. Otherwise, again, in a market where everything is different, I just think it's a flawed. You can't take an average. That's not standard or recognized methodology, a mean or other statistical approaches. It really is human reconciliation.
Exactly. Like you said, it's a starting point more than anything else.
So yes, maybe you're not outside of that range. Maybe you're not above the highest price per square foot or lowest per square foot in a building or a neighborhood. But if you're just going to be looking at it in a vacuum and say, okay, here's a deal at $1,600 a square foot, and here's 4 comps from condos in the neighborhood which are at $2,300 a square foot. So you're like, yeah, clearly this is, worth it. Well, that's not necessarily the case if you've given me 4 comps that are all 50% superior.
Is there a limit, going back to the earlier conversation that we had really quickly, is there a limit on, let's say someone does a phenomenally beautiful renovation and you're going to account for the adjustment for renovation in your value analysis, a unit that is unrenovated versus renovated? Is there a maximum? I heard an appraiser tell me one time, but I'm not sure how you go about it. Is there a maximum percent increase that you could justifiably assign to an apartment in a building that is over all the other comps in the building? Like, realistically, let's say I really believe that my unit is the best unit in the building. How much higher can you price my unit versus the rest of the building?
The answer is it depends on being able to identify something equivalent somewhere else. So if you are 40% above all the comps in your building, I need to find another property that is on par, which does not require any adjustment, or 1 or 2 or some significant number of identical sales. And that supports the fact that every other unrenovated comp may be unrenovated by process of elimination after you've accounted for all the other factors, whatever the percentage, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40. The answer is there is no maximum limit to the percentage of adjustment. It's, can that adjustment be supported? I can't say that adjustment is 40% if I've not been able to identify anything else that is renovated to the similar extent.
Right.
That's just not going to fly in a bank appraisal.
I've had situations where we were able to sell listings for more money than any other unit went for, and the appraisal does come in and
it can. It's often more of a factor in buildings that have a lot of sales. We're more apt to get stuck in a building where there are low sales than if it's almost better to have no comps at all. Then there's nothing in the building that says that the apartment isn't worth it.
Yeah, it's true. I have a lot of intelligent clients that when we go out looking in buildings, let's say they have a high budget, they will say, and I use this as a general rule of thumb too, but I'm interested in your thoughts. You never want the most expensive or nicest apartment in a building. Is that true?
It probably is the same concept as, why do you want to have the nicest house in the worst neighborhood?
Right.
If you're looking at economics and that's what you are ranking as your highest factor, then yeah, probably having the nicest apartment or the most renovated apartment in a building is going to be an issue in terms of the economic performance of that purchase. If you're looking for the utility of enjoying it, that's a different factor. It's a different consideration.
Yeah, that's exactly true. And sometimes I do have that conversation with my clients. So sometimes you want to justify everything with numbers, and sometimes I do tell them you really can't. How happy are you going to be with this? That also does factor into whether or not you want to buy it.
Every buyer is different, and everyone's got different factors that they're considering. So yes, the economic performance of an asset and the utility and happiness that an asset provides are 2 very different considerations.
Incredible point. I think that was a very nice piece of information to leave our audience with, as long as we didn't forget anything. Did we forget anything?
I don't think we did. I think we hit it all.
That was very comprehensive. Thank you so much, Andrew, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Can you tell our audience how they can find you?
You can go to my website, www.gothamvaluation.com. You can email me at agoodman@gothamvaluation.com, or you can reach us by phone, 212-675-2770.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew Goodman, for the wealth of knowledge today.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you guys for being here, and stay tuned for the next one.